everyone, and welcome back to another episode of NAPO's podcast, Standout, for organizing and productivity professionals to better your business. I'm productivity catalyst Claire Kumar, and thrilled to be with you again. Now, this episode is special, especially for all you productivity professionals out there, because you're going to already know and love my guest. We're going to be diving into the topic of distraction. Now, your attention may well be your greatest resource. It is certainly in demand, and as evidenced by every application that you download that's clamoring for the permission to send you a notification and interrupt your day at some time when you're not expecting it, we could be tempted to blame technology. But perhaps that's too easy. Here to shed some light on the topic is author, speaker, entrepreneur, and investor Nir Eyal. Let me tell you a little bit more about Nir. He lives in the world of behavioral design, which is at the intersection of psychology, technology, and business. He weaves together user experience, behavioral economics, and neuroscience. You can see why I love everything that he's about. So Nir authored his first book, Hooked: How to Build Habit-Forming Products. Those are the apps that I was just talking about. And his most recent book, Indistractable: How to Control Your Attention and Choose Your Life. Nir is also a lecturer in marketing at the Stanford Graduate School of Business and Design, and a successful entrepreneur and investor in the likes of Anchor. You might have heard that. That's a Spotify platform for podcasting. And you do have a podcast too, Nir, which I just discovered last night. FocusMate, which is helping people around the world get things done. And one of my fave apps ever, Canva. So a big warm welcome to you, Nir.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here with you.
Oh, thanks for joining me. I've been excited for this for weeks. Before we dive into the topic of distraction, though, I'd love to start with something you mentioned towards the end of the book in the acknowledgments. You share that your daughter, Jasmine, was the inspiration to become Indistractable. And not only that, she helped with the naming of the book, the cover design, and its marketing. I wonder if you could tell just a little bit about Jasmine Spirit, what she inspired, and then how she helped you out.
Sure. Yeah. So she was really the spark for this entire book. And the reason it was because, and this is a little bit, every time, this is in the book in detail, but every time I tell this story, I clench up a little bit because it's a little bit personal and a little bit embarrassing. So I'll just go ahead and tell it. But basically, I had just published my first book, and it was all about how to build habit-forming products. And the idea behind that book was to help all sorts of entrepreneurs out there build the kind of products and services that build good habits in our lives. It's not for the social media companies and the video game companies. They know those techniques. That's where I stole these methods from. And what I wanted to do was to democratize them for everybody else, so we can build ed tech and health tech and fintech products to help people live better, happier, more connected lives. So shortly after that book was published and became a bestseller, I had an afternoon planned with my daughter, and we sat down together and we had this book of activities that were designed to bring daddies and daughters together, just like a daddy and me book. One of the activities was to do a Sudoku puzzle together. Another was to have a paper airplane flying contest, all kinds of silly little things that we could do together. And one of the activities in the book was to each answer this question. The question was, if you could have any superpower, what superpower would you want? And I remember that question verbatim, but I can't tell you what my daughter said, because in that moment, I started checking my phone. I don't even know what I was looking at. And my daughter got the message that I was sending very clearly, that whatever was on my phone was more important than she was. And she left the room to go play with some toy outside. And that's when I realized I had blown it. And Claire, I told this story to a friend of mine, just like I just told you. And we have daughters of similar age. And it's funny. He asked his daughter, he was curious. He said, "Hey, honey, I'm curious. If you could have any superpower, what superpower would you want?" Expecting that she'd say fly like Superman, or, have a lasso like Wonder Woman or something. And she said, "I want to talk to animals." And he said, "That's interesting. Why would you want to talk to animals?" And she says, "So that when you and mommy are on your phones, I'll have someone to talk to."
Boom.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Talk about tugging at our heartstrings, right? And many of us,
Yeah.
we've experienced this. Who hasn't been snubbed at the table? By the way, is the new term. Phone snubbing is fubbing now. Phone snubbing is called fubbing.
Oh, where it's clearly giving the impression that my phone beats you. It's
Yeah,
like,
yeah. Who
yeah,
hasn't sat down in a meeting and seen
yeah.
half the room on their
Sorry,
devices, or
Nir,
sat down?
I've just got to look
Yeah,
at my right.
over here, Claire. Over here, I'm talking.
Right.
And who hasn't done this themselves?
Yeah.
The fact of the matter is, we do this all the time. And even if you're polite enough not to do this to someone sitting across the table from you, if you're anything like I used to be, I would sit down at work and I would say, okay, I'm definitely going to work on that big project. And yet somehow 20, 30, 40 minutes later, I'm doing everything but the thing I said I was going to do this morning. Or, I used to say, oh, I'm definitely going to exercise. I wouldn't. I'm totally going to start eating right. No, I didn't. And I got sick of it, Claire. At some point I said, wait a minute, if you ask me what superpower I would most want, I just want the power to do what I say I'm going to do. Because the fact of the matter is, today, we all know what to do. We know what to do. If you don't know what to do, Google it, right? Who doesn't know that the way to be healthy, the way to eat, to take care of your body is to eat right and exercise? Does anybody not know that? Do we need another diet book to tell us this? We know. Does anybody not know that if you want to have good relationships with the people you love, you have to be fully present? We know that. Does anybody need to be told that to excel at your job, you have to do the work, especially the hard stuff that other people don't want to do?
Yeah.
We know this. The problem is, we don't know how to stop getting in our own way.
We don't need to interrupt. We need to interrupt our own patterns. And you talk about that. And so I have to say that, my pool closed months ago, and that was my easy go-to morning ritual that really kicked off my day really well. I lost it. I've been floundering without it. But with your suggestion in my ear, especially rereading the book again, I read it months ago, and I was rereading it again this week. I had this concept you have of, you talk about getting in touch with the trigger, the task, and the temperament, right? And getting in touch with the trigger is like, wait a second. I'm wondering if you can dive into that, because I just want to credit you right now, because I went and climbed stairs in my building this morning before our meeting because I thought, I need to replace this ritual that was really working so well for me with something else. But without having made a decision, it was easy to see erosion. And I would find myself in my pajamas at 2 p.m. in January on a gray day going, well, you said you were going to shower after you exercise, but look at this, you haven't exercised yet. It's pretty bad. So can you help us understand that?
Sure. So I think the best place to start is to really dissect this term distraction. What does it even mean? I thought I understood what the term meant, and I didn't. A good way to know if you understand a word is to test yourself by asking whether you know the opposite of that term, right? What's the antonym? So if you ask people what's the opposite of distraction, most people will tell you it's focus, right? But that's not exactly right. The opposite of distraction is not focus. If you look at the origin of the word, the opposite of distraction is traction. That both words come from the same Latin root, trahare, which means to pull, and they both end in the same 6 letters, A-C-T-I-O-N, that spells action, reminding us that distraction is not something that happens to us, it is an action we take. So traction, by definition, is any action.
So distraction is an action we take.
Yes, they're both actions.
That's huge right there.
Right.
Because we think somebody's doing something to us. But wait a second. Okay, I love that point.
So traction is any action that you take that pulls you towards your goals, things you do with intent, things that move you closer to your values and help you become the kind of person you want to become. The opposite of traction is distraction. Distraction is any action that pulls you further away from what you plan to do, further away from your goals, further away from living out your values and becoming the kind of person you want to become. So this is much more than semantics. This is really important, because I would argue any action can be traction or distraction based on our intent, based on whether we use forethought. Now, let me give you an example. I used to, for years, sit down at my desk at work, get into work first thing in the morning and say, okay, there's that big thing I need to do on my to-do list, top of my to-do list, that thing that I've been procrastinating on, making my calls or do it for, writing that chapter, whatever the case might be, that thing that I need to do. Nothing's going to get in my way. I'm not going to get distracted. I'm going to work on it right now. That's what I said I'm going to do with my morning. I'm going to get started. But first, let me just check some email. right? Let me just check
Mhm.
that email or scroll a few Slack channels or do some of the other things on my to-do list, the easy tasks real quick, just to get started. Why? Because they're all work related, right? I'm not being unproductive. I'm doing work related tasks. And what I didn't realize is that that is the worst, most dangerous, most pernicious form of distraction. When we allow distraction to trick us into prioritizing the easy and the urgent work as opposed to the hard and important work. So
And is
just
that
because
because
email is work
they're pulling
related,
us? Because there's an expectation from somebody else. It's pulling us because we know somebody's expecting. But that hard, important work of a chapter to write where nobody's waiting for that chapter right now, it doesn't have the same pull. Is there something to that?
well, anything that is not what you plan to do with your time
Mm-hmm.
is by definition a distraction,
Mm-hmm.
right? Anything, even the stuff
Yep.
that feels productive is a distraction. It's the worst kind of distraction because you don't even realize you got distracted.
Yeah.
Conversely, anything can be traction. So
Yeah.
I'm not one of these chicken little tech critics that tells you that the iPhone is melting your brain and stop using social media. That's rubbish. You can watch YouTube videos. You can go on social media. You can use these technologies. They're wonderful, but you have to use them on your schedule and according to your values, not someone else's. So we've got traction, we've got distraction. Now
Mm-hmm.
to your question around what prompts us to those actions. So
Right.
here's where we have triggers. We have two kinds
Right.
of triggers. We have external triggers, which are things like your boss, sending you an email, the pings and dings in the environment around you. Those are all external triggers. But it
Mm-hmm.
turns out when it comes to our technology, that's only 10% of the time that we check our phones. Do we check them because of an external trigger? Can you believe this? Studies find people
Yeah.
check their phone only 10% of the time because of a ping or ding. So what's the other 90%? The other 90% of the time is because of what we call an internal trigger. An internal trigger is an uncomfortable emotional state that we seek to escape from. Let me say that
Mm-hmm.
again. An internal trigger is an uncomfortable emotional state that we seek to escape from. So 90% of the time you get distracted, it is because of a feeling,
Mm-hmm.
loneliness, boredom, fatigue, uncertainty, stress, anxiety. That is 90% of the time that we get distracted is because of what we call an internal trigger, which brings me to this cold, hard conclusion. Okay. Time management is pain management. Time management is pain management. I know your audience is full of productivity gurus and experts, and I'm telling you, none of our life hacks work for people unless we help them deal with the discomfort that they are trying to escape. That is the most important step. We have to start with those internal triggers. It's about feelings first and foremost. So that's step one to becoming indistractable, mastering the internal triggers. Because look, whether it's too much news, too much booze, too much football, too much Facebook, we will always get distracted unless we know how to deal with those internal triggers so that we can leverage them like rocket fuel to propel us towards traction rather than trying to escape this discomfort through distraction.
It's brilliant and so powerful. It's catching that moment, tuning into those feelings, and then knowing what to do to deal with it. And there's one
Exactly.
suggestion you have, which I really liked, which was to allow yourself some time. Sit with
Mhm.
that thought, notice it, observe it, and don't move to responding to the compulsion to act in that way.
Right.
While other people call it as surfing the urge.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, this comes from acceptance and commitment therapy. So, everything in my book, I read a lot of business books and productivity books, and I always really dislike these books that are basically full of personal anecdotes of, well, this worked for me, so it should work for you. That's nice, but
Yeah,
I want to see the studies, right? Like
right.
I want to see the
100%.
peer-reviewed studies. So there's 30 pages of citations
Mhm.
to peer-reviewed studies, and one of these techniques, there's dozens of different techniques that I talk about in that one specific chapter around how to master internal triggers. One of them is about surfing the urge and using what's called the 10-minute rule. And I didn't invent this. This comes from acceptance and commitment therapy. And the idea here is that instead of telling yourself no, you want to tell yourself not yet. Why? Because abstinence backfires.
Mm.
That when you tell yourself don't do something, this leads to what we call the ironic process theory. So, for example, Claire, right now, I want you to do something that you're not doing right now. I want you to just continue doing what you're doing right now, which is don't think about a white bear.
Right.
Don't do it, Claire. Don't think about a white bear. What are you thinking about right now, Claire?
Oh, white bear with a red
Of
shirt.
course
I'm
you
like
are.
putting a red shirt on that bear, trying to do something. Yeah.
So this is why when we tell people, oh, you should take a digital detox, or just stop using social media, or just stop checking email so
Yeah.
often, just abstain,
Yeah.
it doesn't work. It's like
Yeah.
pulling on a rubber band. It's like,
Yeah.
when you pull on a rubber band, you pull, 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 pull. Eventually you can't pull anymore. And
Yeah.
when you let go, the rubber band doesn't just go where it started. No, it ricochets across the room.
Yeah.
So instead of
You can
telling
get
ourselves,
hurt.
don't do something.
You can get
Yeah,
hurt playing with
exactly.
rubber bands.
And it turns out this is actually the root of addiction. We're learning more and more that addiction is not about the chemicals, just the chemicals. It's about 10% about, it's about 1% what happens in your body. It's 99% of what's happening in your brain.
100%.
Meaning
Yeah.
it's not the chemical addiction.
Yeah.
It's how we think about these things. That when people tell themselves, don't smoke, don't smoke, don't smoke, don't smoke, don't smoke. Okay, fine, I'll smoke. The pleasure that comes from smoking is simply the relief of not having to tell yourself, don't smoke.
Oh, man.
Because smokers, almost 100% of smokers don't actually like the sensation of smoking. If you survey them, it turns out studies have found they actually don't like it.
Wow.
All
And
the
yeah.
reason, yeah. So back to this 10-minute rule. I got a little off track here. So the
I
10-minute
love
rule
it.
says, don't tell yourself no, tell yourself not yet. So how does this work? When you have a task that you need to complete, and
Yeah.
in the middle of the task, you find yourself about to want to go, check email or Google something, or let's say you're on a diet and you're trying to resist that piece of chocolate cake, or you're trying to stop smoking. Instead of telling yourself, don't do it, instead of telling yourself no,
Yeah.
you want to tell yourself, I can do those things. There's no
Yeah.
problem. I can check email. I can eat the chocolate cake, but
I'm
not
the
right
boss
now.
of me.
Exactly. You're in
Yeah.
control, right?
Yeah.
It's your decision. But I'm not going to do it right now. I'm going to do it in 10 minutes. So this happens to me all the time. So writing is hard work. I've written thousands of articles. I've been published in the New York Times, Harvard Business Review. I've written 2 bestsellers. It never gets easy. Okay. Writing is always a difficult, horrible slog. It is hard work. It never becomes a habit, at least not in my case.
Mm-hmm.
So when I am writing, all I want to do is go Google something, do some quote unquote research, check email, just escape the discomfort that comes with writing.
Yeah.
So instead of doing that, what I'll do, instead of escaping that discomfort with distraction, what I'll do is I'll take out my phone, I'll set a timer for 10 minutes, I'll put the phone down, and now I can take one of 2 paths. I can either, when I'm ready, get back to the task at hand, get back to the writing, or sit with that sensation, do what's called surf the urge. Because what we know about these sensations, these uncomfortable internal triggers, they're like waves. They
Mm-hmm.
feel like they're going to last forever, but that's not the case. They crest and then they subside. And if we can ride that wave like a surfer on a surfboard, if we can surf the urge long enough for it to crest and subside, we don't have that urge anymore. And all it takes is 10 minutes. It's amazing. If you just set the timer for 10 minutes and just sit with yourself, figure out, okay, what am I feeling right now? Where is this coming from? And I tell you exactly what kind of dialogue to have with yourself. It's very important. You can have a bad dialogue that makes it worse, or
Yeah.
you can have a self-compassionate dialogue that makes it better. And what you will find is by the time those 10 minutes are up, you'll be right back on that task at hand.
That's amazing. Is there science behind the 10 minutes?
It's just a good starting point. Now, the idea
Yeah.
is over time, the 10-minute rule becomes the 12-minute rule and the 15-minute rule. So what you're doing is you're building self-efficacy. You're
Mm-hmm.
proving to yourself, you're dispelling this myth that people carry around with them. It drives me crazy. Oh, I have a short attention span. I have an addictive personality. I'm not good with self-control. I don't have
Right.
willpower. I'm a Sagittarius. Whatever
Yeah.
cockamamie excuse we put on ourselves, this
Yeah.
temperament that we think we have, and none
Yeah.
of it's true. So
Yeah.
what you're doing is you're training yourself to believe that
Yeah.
you are capable, you are indistractable.
I love it. I've been coaching a few clients recently, and I've seen this over the years. A lot of people have this same issue, and you can nod if you're out there with the same challenge. You've had a long day at work, you've maybe had time with your kids, and you're tired at the end of the day, but you feel like you deserve some me time. So you're going to
Mm.
put on the TV or you're going to scroll on your phone before bed, and you know your intention is, oh, I said I was going to get to bed early. But then you follow this path into, in it's the intention is, and this is where when I'm working with clients, I'm like, you have to honor your intention was you want to play a little, you want to escape, you don't want to have to be contributing then. Okay, so what does it look like if you were intentional and put some boundaries on that? What could it look like, and how are you going to interrupt yourself so it doesn't become, instead of 15 minutes, it becomes an hour and a half. Is it not using something electronic? Is it going back to paper that doesn't have, other
Mhm.
browser windows potentially? How are you going to put some boundaries on it and still honor what your body was telling you it wanted? So to
Yeah,
not
so I think
deny
this
it.
is why there's these four critical pillars to becoming indistractable. We talked a little bit about the internal triggers and how we can master those internal triggers. There's all kinds of tools we can use, all kinds of arrows in our quiver that we can pull out whenever we
Mm,
feel that discomfort. It's important that we know which tools to use for the job. But
yeah.
that's just step one, mastering the internal triggers. Step number two is to make time for traction. We talked about traction earlier.
Hmm.
So one of the best things we can do is to plan out our day. It's called
Hmm.
making an implementation intention. And there's literally been thousands of studies that show how effective it is to simply plan your time. So
Yeah.
there's nothing wrong with wanting to scroll Facebook or check Instagram or watch a video on Netflix. It's fine. There's nothing wrong with it as long as it's done with intent, with forethought. If you're doing it to escape discomfort, that's not a healthy behavior. That's a harmful behavior. If you're ignoring your family, if you're
Hmm.
ignoring your other obligations, and you're looking for emotional escape when you did not intend to, that's distraction. But if you put on your calendar, hey, from after dinner from 8 to 8:30, I'm gonna scroll social media, and then from 8:30 to 10 o'clock, I'm gonna watch Netflix. No problem. It's
Yeah.
not up to me or anybody else to tell you how to spend your time. I
Yeah.
want you to book that time. The difference is, here's the thing: most people use this horrendous technique of running their life on a to-do list. And the research shows that running your life on
Yeah.
a to-do list is terrible for your personal productivity. Terrible. Now, let me clarify. I'm not against taking things out of your head and putting them on a piece of paper or in an app. That's good. What I'm against is running your life on a to-do list. If you wake up in the morning and you look at your to-do list rather than your calendar to tell you what to do with your
Yeah.
time, you've already lost. Why? Because here's what's happening, right? Exactly what you talked about with your client. Your client gets home at the end of the day. They're tired. They want to relax. They want to be with their family. They want to watch TV. They just want to unwind,
Hmm.
but they're still thinking about their to-do list. They're still thinking about all the things they didn't accomplish, and they feel guilt and they feel shame that there's all these tasks left undone. Why? Because the to-do list, nobody ever finishes all the things on their to-do list because to-do lists have no constraints. You can
That's right.
always add more and more and more. As opposed to a Timebox calendar, there is a constraint. You can always make more money. You can't make more time, right? So we should be stingy with our time and generous with our money because we can't make more time. Everyone has the same 24 hours in a day.
Right.
So when a person who keeps a Timebox calendar comes home from work, on their Timebox calendar is spend time with the kids. And anything but doing that is a distraction, right?
Exactly.
In my calendar, it says
Yeah.
I'm going to watch TV. That
Yeah.
now becomes traction. Everything else is a distraction. And I think very few people listening to me right now have ever felt the joy, the freedom of real leisure,
Mm.
knowing that whatever it is that you're doing right now is exactly what you plan to do. It is
Yeah.
such a gift you can give yourself, but that only comes when you plan your day. Why? Because you can't call something a distraction unless you know what it distracted you from. So if you can't look at your calendar and tell me what it was you planned to do, you have no right to say you got distracted, because what'd you get distracted from? You didn't plan it.
Can you say that in one sentence again? I think that is so powerful. You can't call it a
Sure.
distraction unless,
You can't call something a distraction unless you know what it distracted you from. So
right.
if your calendar is full of just blank space, right? If you're one of these people who says, "Oh, I just want the freedom to do whatever it is I want to do,"
Yeah.
you don't realize that you're not free. You are caged by the fact that you don't give yourself some constraints, that we perform our best when we give ourselves some constraints. But that requires a little bit of planning. And the people who put in the just 15 minutes a week, literally, this is all it takes, 15 minutes every week to make a Timebox calendar. Trust me, it will change your life.
I totally agree with you. Those days where the calendar has no blocks in it, there's almost no urgency even to finish
Yeah.
something before the next thing comes up. I'm fueled by that kind of, okay, I got 30 minutes until I'm meeting so and so. What can I knock off? Right? There's a fuel to it. But there's also a resistance I've seen over the years with people who are like, I don't want to schedule. I feel too restricted. Have you got any research around where that feeling comes from? There's a
Yes.
rebelliousness to being caged.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And this is called psychological reactance. Psychological reactance is this phenomenon that's well studied, well observed, that when we feel like our autonomy is threatened, when we are
Mhm.
told what to do, the natural human reflex is to rebel. Now, here's why humans are so weird. It turns out that we experience reactance not only when our boss micromanages us, not only when you were a kid and your mom told you what to do. Your mom says, take an umbrella, take a coat, and you're don't tell me what to do, right? Like that's reactance. Not
Yep.
only do we experience when someone else tells us what to do, we also experience it when we tell ourselves what to do. How messed up is that? Right?
It really is. It really is. And it's
Right.
so there. I'm suffering from it a little bit right now because I feel like, oh, I don't want to have too many commitments in my calendar. But when I have them, I embrace them, and it's finding the right rhythm of how much free time there ought to be for mind
Yeah.
wandering and flexing. I think I'm a little bit too attached to, oh, it's nice out. I want to go out now. I want to be able to do that.
Mm,
But
mm.
and having the rigidity and commitments to people to say, oh, I'm going to do a clubhouse every week.
Yeah.
I don't know, right?
So
But yeah, I
there's a
love
few
this.
things. I'll
Yeah.
give you three solutions to this. Number one, we have to change our conversation with ourselves. So instead of telling ourselves, I have to do something, right? Because my calendar says so, we want to
Yep.
change that dialogue to realize we get to do that thing. Okay. That's
Yep.
one way to disarm psychological reactance. It's not a calendar that someone set for you. You decided how you are going to spend that time. And so you get to do the task. You don't have to do the task.
You're still the
Another
boss of
thing,
you. You're still the
exactly.
boss of you. Haven't demoted yourself.
That's right. That's one way
Yeah.
to disarm psychological reactance. Another
Mhm.
way is to realize that these calendars in the day, when you make a time box calendar, that's set, but you want to revise your calendar over time. So in my life, and most people that I've worked with over the years, we revise our calendar every week. And it takes me literally, Claire, I have 15 minutes scheduled in my calendar every Sunday night to
Mhm.
review my schedule for the week ahead. And I
Yep.
ask myself, how can I make that schedule easier to follow in the week
Mhm.
ahead? So I adjust it. Hey, you know what? I see I do really miss in the summertime going out for a walk. No problem. I'll put that now in my schedule. Okay,
Yeah.
which leads me to the third piece of advice is that I don't want you just to schedule the productive stuff, quote unquote. It's not just about work.
Yeah.
If you like playing video games, if you like social media, if you like taking walks, if you want to pray, meditate, watch TV, I don't care. By putting it in your schedule, that's where you allow yourself to spend your time any way you wish according to your values. So it's not just about rigidly cranking out work. That's not what I'm talking about. It's about
Yeah.
making sure that you take care of what I call these three life domains of you, your
Mhm.
relationships, and then finally your work to make sure that you're spending your time in accordance with your values.
And that's the key to a fulfilling life, which is what a lot of people that come to me are complaining they don't have. It's like I'm working really
Uh,
hard, but I'm not productive at work.
yeah.
Debatable. And I'm not present at home. And those
Yeah.
two challenges are making people feel like less than enough everywhere. And that's exhausting and unfair given the amount of work people are doing. So I love that when you get this alignment and you not only have this time box calendar, but you have these tools to deal with the internal triggers, and you talk about hacking back the external triggers. So you're sort of refining. I think life is always about refining your situation. So I love that you mentioned in the calendar approach to and structure to be looking at it as it's a fluid thing. It's not this is the way you're
Right.
going to live forever. This is the best we're going to do this week. This is what we think we're going to do.
Right.
And then you can reflect and adjust again. And I guess, I
Yes.
mean, you're coming to us from Singapore now, which is pretty consistent when the sun rises and sets. It doesn't fluctuate so much. And the weather is pretty consistent. I'm in Toronto. I could have minus 21 day and plus 15 the next day. It's like it's wildly all over the place. And so it's curious to me how that influences our motivation, our energy levels. Like, I think that there's not to get on a tangent, but I think a great success for us as human beings is managing our neurotransmitters is right is like understanding those triggers. And so boredom comes in, you pay attention to that trigger. What do? How do we integrate, or have you looked at how we integrate our environments and those kind of external forces that are actually really compelling to us as human animals? Have you looked into
Mm.
that piece at all?
Yeah, so we talked about step 1 is mastering the internal triggers. Step 2 is making
Mm-hmm.
time for traction. Step 3 is hacking back the external triggers. Step 4 is preventing distraction with packs, which we can get to. So
Yeah.
step 3 is all about making sure that all those external triggers, that we're not passive, right? That
Yeah.
becoming indistractable doesn't mean you never get distracted. I get distracted from time to time, but here's the thing. The difference between a distractible person and an indistractable person is that a distractible person keeps getting distracted by the same predictable things again and again and again. How many times can we complain that oh, there was an emergency at work? Really? That's not predictable that that you have
Right.
emergencies at work? If it
Right.
happens more than once, it's not unpredictable.
Right.
You know,
Right.
the weather. Okay, I understand Toronto weather. I spend 6 months in New York. Yeah, but you know what? It's winter every year. Right?
Right.
Like it comes and
Right.
goes. So we can
Right.
take steps today to prevent getting distracted tomorrow. So a distractible person keeps getting distracted. It's like Paulo Coelho had a wonderful quote. He said, "A mistake repeated more than once is a decision." So an indistractable
Ooh.
person says, I see you there, distraction. I see what you did there. But I know that every distraction only has 3 potential sources: an internal trigger, an external trigger, or a planning problem. That's it. So
Ah.
I'm going to make sure that I take steps today to prevent getting distracted tomorrow. So to your question around external triggers,
Yeah.
this is the most practical section of the book. It's just a quick fire. There's like 8 chapters of all the different external triggers, meetings and
Yep.
emails and Slack notifications and kids, right? How many of us are
And
working from home?
pets.
And pets, all these things that can be distractions. I show
Yeah.
you step by step how to hack back the external triggers. That's actually probably the easiest thing to do. You know, for
Yeah.
example, 2/3 of people with a smartphone never change their notification settings.
That blew me away. That's the first thing I
What?
tell people. That's the first thing I'm like, the
Of
first thing we're going to
course.
do is stop all
Come
these beeps and
on.
dings. It's like sending your
Yes.
cortisol through the roof. It's like a
As
toddler going, mommy, 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 mommy
yeah,
through the day. I'm like,
exactly.
why are you doing this to yourself?
Exactly. Or like, you know, these notifications that are all over people's phones, they open up their computer screen and there's a million icons and, you know,
Yep.
notifications. We can turn that stuff off. So it takes
Yeah.
5 minutes. Can we no, you know, we cannot dare to complain that this technology is addicting us and, you know,
Yeah.
dopamine pumps and all this silly stuff. It's ridiculous. It's not
Yeah.
true. You
I
tell me
ask
it
my
can't take
clients.
5 minutes.
Yeah. Sorry. Go
Yeah.
ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, take 5 minutes to change these
Yeah.
notification settings. That's kindergarten stuff. That's the easy stuff. You don't need to buy a book to tell you how to do that. The harder stuff is the stuff that's culturally endemic, right? So what do you do if you
Yes.
work in a workplace where it's not the technology, it's your boss who calls you at 9 p.m. when you're having dinner
Yeah.
with your family or something?
Yeah.
That's a more difficult issue. But it turns
Yeah.
out that we can actually fix that issue as well. It's a culture problem. The nice thing is culture can change, and I show you exactly how in the book.
That's exactly right. And it starts with yourself. What can you do? And then you can move out
Right.
into what else you can influence and what
Right.
boundaries you can set. But I always ask my clients, so are you think you're going to forget to check your email? Do you think you're going to forget about it? You don't need a reminder to do something you're naturally going to do anyway. So you only need a
Right.
reminder to pull you out to bring your attention to that which you intended to do at a specific time, so that I'm here with you in this moment and I didn't, get absorbed into something else and forget to dial in.
That's right.
So
That's right.
yeah.
The mantra is this trigger serving you or are you serving it? So not all external triggers are bad, right? I had an
Hmm.
external trigger that told me it was time for our conversation. That's great. That
Yeah.
was serving me. But if I'm
Yes.
spending time with my daughter and that's what I plan to do with my time, I don't
Right.
need a ping or ding right then.
Right. So I mean, the real great place to start for people is to get really clear on your intentions around not just your workday, but that rich life that you want to cultivate for yourself. And I just did a radio interview last week, and the quote that they used was that I think we don't reflect on what we want in that richness of life. We don't pause. And
Right.
to your point, if you don't have the intention, then how can you say you were distracted?
That's
So,
right. That's right.
right,
And
it
so
all
this is
falls
where
apart.
values come into play, right? So
Yeah.
values are attributes of the person you want to become. That's the definition, my definition of values, attributes of the person you want to become. So
Yeah.
we have to ask ourselves, how would the person I want to become spend their time?
Yeah.
You know, we can talk a good talk about our values, right? Most people value their health, but
Yeah.
do they have time in their schedule for physical activity? Do they have time in their schedule for sleep? You know, we know that sleep is absolutely critical for physiological and psychological well-being. We tell
Yeah.
our kids, oh, you have to get to bed on time, get to your, you know, you have a
Yeah.
bedtime. but we're hypocrites. Do we have a bedtime? No.
Most of us
So
don't. I did a whole thing on
yeah,
sleep this last month about it because, I mean, and the National Sleep Association will tell us you need 7 to 9 hours. I'm like, hooey, what do you actually need? Define your sleep number. If you need 9 and you're only
sure.
getting 7, there's a problem. So,
Right. So what
right?
most people do is they're not intentional with it, right? They
Yeah,
don't sit down and say, wait a minute, how if I need, let's say 8 hours of sleep, well, that means I
right,
need to go to bed at 10, and that means I need to start brushing my teeth at 9:30 and take a shower.
right.
Like by planning out your day, it
Yeah.
seems like it's a lot of work. It's actually not. You do it once and then you revise it just in small bits, but it is a
Yes.
life-changing practice because it's the only way to make sure you're living according to your values.
Well, I get people to add a timer in. So I now know my hair used to take 35 seconds. It was much like yours. Now it's after COVID. It's just, I haven't been able to get a haircut since October. So now it's 3 minutes and 15 seconds to dry my
There
hair
you go.
and 8 minutes to do my makeup. So it's
Yeah.
when you know these things, when you know,
Yeah.
then you can say, I need half an hour to get ready for an interview, right? It's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
so knowledge is
So
power, awareness is power, and intent.
imagine if you extrapolate that out to all
Mhm.
sorts of tasks. This is another reason why to-do lists, or I should say more specifically, running your life on a to-do list is so terrible
Yeah.
because, we have what's called a planning fallacy. And studies have found that people on average take 3 times longer to finish a task than they planned. That's on average. Okay. Why? Because when we put a task on a to-do list,
Yeah.
we have no feedback mechanism to teach us how long something takes. So the reason you know that doing your makeup takes 8 minutes is
Yeah.
because you have rapid feedback telling you, oh, how long did it take me? You learned over time. The
Yeah.
problem is with most people, when it's a big assignment, right? When
Mhm.
it's finish this PowerPoint presentation or write this chapter or finish this blog post or make the
Mhm.
sales calls, when it's on a to-do list, there's no feedback. We never learn how long something takes us unless we make time for it in our calendars. And then we have this feedback loop. So the
Yeah.
goal is not, ooh, how many boxes did I check off? That's not the
Yeah.
right metric. The
Yeah.
goal is one thing: to work on a task for as long as you said you would without distraction. That's
Mhm.
it. Work on that task for as long as you said you would without distraction. And the kicker is the people who use that method that I described in Indistractable and measure themselves solely based on their ability to work on a task without distracted, they actually finish more. They are more productive than the people who use the outdated to-do list method.
And aren't they feeling completely different at the end of their day? Like, right?
Absolutely.
They're like, yeah, rock star, right?
That's
Right?
right. That's right.
Yeah. So
That's
it's
exactly right.
building that
Because
efficacy and sense of pride, and the self-talk can change then. And the great thing I think though is I love that you bring up self-compassion in this journey because nobody there should be beating themselves up about what's happened already. What can we do
right.
going forward? And how can you be kind to yourself to get there? Do you want to talk about packs as the last thing
Sure.
that we talk about?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll make it quick because I know we're running low on time, but essentially pacts are the last line of defense. So there is no one magic bullet, right? There's no one life hack. There's no one, magic solutions that's going to take care of all your procrastination and distraction problems. It's really about using these 4 steps in concert: mastering internal triggers, making time for traction, hacking back external triggers. And if those 3 fail, we
Yeah.
utilize what we call a pre-commitment device, which acts as like a firewall so that if we somehow slip off track, we have this last line of defense to prevent us from getting distracted. So I talk about how we have what we call identity packs, price packs, and effort packs to
Mhm.
keep us on track, just in case the other 3 techniques fail.
It's
And then,
possible. It's possible they
yes,
might.
it
Yeah.
happens. It
Yeah.
happens. So it's really about using these 4 techniques in concert.
It's amazing. There's a whole toolkit here. So I hope everybody's listening has taken some gems away. It's a fabulous read. It's a fabulous
Thank
for
you.
you. I mean, it was fabulous for me as a productivity coach. I took loads away. And also when you're working with your clients, it's there are things that here that you will want to embed in your practice for sure. So Nir, thank you so much for joining us. It was a treat, and I knew it would be a fantastic conversation. I invite everybody to find Nir at nirandfar.com, right? And Nir is Nir. So nirandfar.com. Pick up a copy of Indistractable. I'm showing it for anybody who's watching on YouTube. It's a gorgeous bright yellow yellow color. You can't miss it. Even if you're distracted, you will not miss this book. And, leave a review if you've listened to this podcast and you find it interesting. We're in all the places. And if you want to find out all the episodes, of course, you can find them at napopodcast.com. So until our next episode, please be kind to yourself, stay safe out there, and enjoy your journey. Oh, Nir, I have about 10 more questions for you, but let me pare it down here. First of all, Indistractable. As somebody who's in the process of writing a book, I find titling and design and all of that really compelling. Tell me how you got to Indistractable as the title.
Yeah, so it's a made up word. And the nice thing about making up a word is that you can define it any way you want. And the reason I titled the book Indistractable is that I wanted it to sound like a superpower. So I remember I told you the story of what happened with Jasmine and how I was embarrassed that I was checking my phone when I was planned to be with my daughter. And it all goes back to that superpower of what superpower would I most want. And so I wanted Indistractable to sound like a superpower, to sound like indestructible, because I really do think that this is the skill of the century, that the power to control your attention is truly how we choose our life.
Yeah. 100%. Love that. And I have to give a little shout out to my friend David Guthrow on the West Coast, who put Indistractable on a sweatshirt to remind himself like a Superman. I have a picture of this.
I love it. I need to see a picture of this.
Yeah, I'll send it to you. And he wore it at a conference, and I'm like, what are you doing? I know this book. What are you doing? And
awesome.
I will send you the picture. I remember he had a question. Yeah, go ahead.
I did that myself, actually. I use that. I have a shirt that says Indistractable on it as well. And it's part of this identity pack that I talk about, that I wanted this to become something people could call themselves. This comes actually out of really good research out of the psychology of religion, that when people have a moniker that they use to describe themselves, they're much more likely to act in accordance with their values. So when someone says, I'm a devout Muslim, they don't have to debate themselves on whether, should I have a beer, right? Because devout Muslims don't drink. A vegetarian doesn't debate with themselves in the morning, should I have a ham sandwich, should I have a bacon sandwich for breakfast? No, a vegetarian doesn't eat meat. Yes. So when we have a moniker, when we have an identity, it makes it much easier to do what we say we're going to do. And so that's why I call the book Indistractable. That's our moniker, right? That's our identity.
Love it. It is a superpower. Absolutely. And it's something you can cultivate, which I love. You've given us the guidance on how to do that, which is amazing. There's something else you added into your book, which is a concept I really try and encourage when I'm working with clients. My whole brand is about having fun while getting things done. And I think, you have the intersection of business, technology, and psychology. And I look at performance, productivity, and pleasure. And so I think we have to weave those together. Otherwise, you can't just look back and say, well, I had a good ride. And that's what I want people to have ultimately as fulfillment. So what do you suggest people do to embed this sense of fun into something that might today look to be mundane?
Yeah, so it's specifically around those tasks that we don't enjoy that we apply this. There's this concept of flow that a researcher by the name of Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi popularized in his book called Flow. And people kind of misapply his work a lot. They think that, I can turn anything into flow. But if you read the book, he really only describes that flow is something you can get into when it's something you enjoy. So he documents, basketball players and surfers. Well, because they enjoy those tasks. How do I get into flow when I have to do my taxes? Yeah. Right? You can't. It's antithetical to it. Yeah. So for those tasks we don't enjoy, what I advocate, and I can't take credit for this research comes from Ian Bogos, who's a professor at Georgia Tech, and he did this he wrote a book called Play Anything, and his assertion was that play doesn't have to be enjoyable. It doesn't actually have to be fun. Which is really weird. If you
say what? Yeah, I know, exactly. Right? What? I thought play was fun. Wait, yeah. Well, now you're taking the fun out of play. Wait a minute.
Right. So his assertion is that for things that we really don't want to do,
Yeah.
The goal is to turn it into play and not necessarily have the requirement that it's enjoyable. Because if we, and it's, I think he makes a really good point, that if we wait around until we feel like it, we'll never do it, because the task is by nature unenjoyable. It's something we don't feel like doing.
Stair climbing at 7 in the
There you
morning.
go. Whatever it might
Yeah.
be. So what he says is that you don't necessarily have to enjoy, play doesn't necessarily have to be enjoyable. It just has to captivate our attention long enough to let us finish what we say we're going to do. That's it.
Right. So it has to be
And
appealing to our brain to attend to.
it just has to,
Yeah.
exactly. It has to
Yeah.
occupy our minds long enough to make sure we don't get
Yeah.
distracted.
I
So
love
there's
that.
all kinds
Yeah.
of techniques that you can use around this. You know, he says, and the technique that I talk about in the book is two things. One, looking for or adding variability to the task. And two, focusing more intensely on that task. So I talk about in the book the story of how Bogost, I interviewed him. He hated mowing his lawn, right? He lives in Georgia. His, you know, he has
He's always got a
kudzu,
lawn.
weeds. He's always got a lawn, and he hates cutting the grass. So what does he do? He figures out a way to play cutting the grass. So he adds constraints to the task. He says, I'm going to try and see how quickly I can mow the lawn. He gets all into different seeds and what types of grass grow there. And he gets more into the task, not with the antiquated Mary Poppins putting a spoonful of sugar on a task. That actually has been shown not to be effective for tasks you have to do again and again, but rather by looking more deeply into the task to find its intricacies, to kind of peel back the onion and figure out what could I play by adding constraints and looking for variability in the task.
Yeah, it's adding interest and also challenge. And that's part of what
Yeah.
Mihai talks about is challenge. You know, you rise to a challenge. You've got the right level of challenge, then you're not going to be too bored and it's not too complex. You're going to dance in that happy zone. So,
Right.
I love the way you weave in the science. It just appeals to my heart so much. Thank you so much for these words of wisdom. Everybody go grab that copy of Indistractable and hang out with Nir. You'll have him in your voice, in your head now. Thanks again, Nir.
My pleasure. Thank you.